let's talk about how this series came to be. When did we start talking about it? I think we started talking about it like right away. Like as we have a mutual friend who introduced us at a party, and we just started talking about like bringing more translation to the Center for Fiction.
Yeah, I was trying to think back about when it was, and it felt like 2020, but it was actually 2019. It was about a
Yeah.
year and a half ago, I think, um, May or June in 2019. Yeah, and we started talking about how to make translation make translation things happen at more translation things sort of happen at the center. And I think we started off talking about a reading series. I think that was the first iteration of what we wanted to do, was a reading series, and that
Mm.
sounded like a great idea. And I think it evolved into, we kept talking and having conversations, and that evolved into maybe potentially maybe one out a mentorship program, and that sounded great too. And then yeah, we just kept talking. We met quite a few times at the Center for Fiction as well, over coffee. A whole bunch of emails were exchanged, and I think your last email was probably about that, I think sort of gave life to this sort of iteration, was I think maybe about 6 months ago, and you emailed me about doing a series of clinics, and that just, that sounded right. It sounded like we'd hit the nail in the coffin, and so now we're here. With I think it's um, going to be a good series to launch what I hope and I think will be a lot of sort of future translation related events at the center. Not that we don't do translator related stuff already, but um, yeah, this is a great launching pad for a lot to come. So
It is exciting. I know that I'm Cedilla and Company is a translators collective. We formed uh, in service to the publishing community, but also in service to ourselves. We wanted to, just to give a little bit of background, we wanted to offer mutual support to translators, to ourselves as translators. And we started talking about different ways that we could offer some of that support to the general public at large. And obviously mentorships were one of the ideas that we discussed, but mentorships, I actually haven't participated in for any formal mentorships, but from what I've heard, and some of my fellow members who have talk about how there's a lot, they're very labor intensive, I think. And they usually also, you want to compensate people, particularly the mentors, for their labor, and it's hard to find funding. So that's why we're so grateful to be able to partner with the Center for Fiction for this. And it also seemed to be, this is a little bit more freeform. I think we're going to be able to include more people in it by doing it in this way. That's our hope. That's our goal. And also to like highlight, there are so many people doing so many interesting and exciting things in the field of literary translation. So this seemed like a good way to sort of create a meeting place. And we did start talking about whatever this collaboration was going to be in the before times. So we were thinking about doing something that was going to take place in person, but as we've seen, this opens things up in completely new and exciting ways. So
absolutely does. Yeah, there's people tuning in from all over the world, and I think Zoom has been great, for that. So um, yeah.
it has. And again, as we're working this out, like we're doing this on the third Thursday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern time, but we are also flexible. We're going to try and see, how this works for people. If it should be earlier, or if it should be later, if it should float around in the, on the schedule. We'd like to try and keep it at a particular day so that people know when to show up for it and can keep it on their schedules. But we want to, we know that this is sort of threading the needle for people who are in Asia, people who are in Europe, people who are in, in the global South. So, so I guess that brings me to the question of, where does translation fit at the Center for Fiction? I should say, I know from my own experience, I know in the beautiful new space that you have this amazing bookstore. And whenever I go in there, translation is really highlighted. It's front and center. It's always on the staff picks shelves. I haven't been there in some time, but I know that there was always that focus. But in terms of like, how do you, as the director of as the manager of the writing programs, where do you see translation fitting in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I first want to highlight, I think, what we already do, for translation. We obviously we have a bookstore and a library with a pretty expansive collection, and we have a lot of works in translation in our bookstore, in our library. We've done quite a few author events, featuring translators, Emily Wilson, Emma Ramadan. We did a launch event for Elena Ferrante. We've got groups that are focused on works in translation, um, led by translators. Currently, I think we have Samuel Rudder and Kaima Glover. I think Sam translates from the Spanish and Kaima from the French. And we have a writer's studio too at the center, beautiful writer's studio where writers can join and work on whatever it is that they're working on. And we've had translators in our writer's studio. And so and I should also add, actually, last year, I think it was in 2019, we added a prize to our portfolio of awards called the Bridge Book Award, which is a project of Casa della Lettura of Rome and the Embassy of the United States in Rome. And it's an award that's meant to bridge Italian and American cultures, and it aims to strengthen sort of mutual understanding between both countries through literature. And the prize covers the translation of costs in the opposite language for a fiction and nonfiction winner in each country. So that was like the latest. And so when I joined the center, that was something that happened fairly recently after I joined. And soon after that, I think we started talking, and so this just seemed like just a proper sort of next step. I see, speaking of bridges, I see the clinics as serving as a bridge for not only just amplifying what we're already doing, but also, like you mentioned before, I think giving access to, I think these clinics will be practical in nature, very informative, but to give people who are, sort of starting off in translation or at any point in their career in translation, valuable information to sort of enter this profession. So I see these clinics also sort of as a launching pad for what I hope will be, I manage writing workshops at the center, so I'm hoping in the spring that we'll be able to offer our first writing workshop in translation. And who knows, maybe in the future, we'll explore the mentorship program. We have a program called the Emerging Writers Fellowship Program that has a mentorship component. And I know when we were talking, that was sort of, I saw that as a model for what we could do also for translation. So, but this is definitely, I see this as sort of a launching pad for, who knows, maybe in the future, a mentorship or fellowship program for emerging translators. So yeah, we do a lot, and there's definitely room to do more. Funding is obviously always, not an issue, but something to, we've got to find. But this is a great start, and yeah, it's exciting. It's really exciting.
It is. I also do want to point out that while I was co-chair of the Penn Translation Committee with Alex Zucker, who's with us tonight, we partnered with the Center for Fiction when it was still in Midtown, actually, and we presented a series called The Business of Literary Translation, and these were 4 events that we did, and this is just back in the archive, so I'm just pointing it out because these are great events that we partner. I know that the Center for Fiction has historically supported translation, so those are recorded and archived, and there were a lot of fantastic speakers who participated in that. So I do want to ask you about what you see as the relationship between mean, you're a translator and a writer. I don't write. I don't call myself a writer, so I'm just a translator. But you, I know, do both. So, what do you see as the relationship between translation and creative writing, between translators and writers,
Um, so when I started translating, one thing that happened is I found myself paying attention to things that I wasn't paying attention to when I was, or that I was paying attention to when I was writing fiction, but um, translation has slowed fiction writing down for me. I see translation as sort of an extension of my MFA program, which I completed a couple of years ago. But I've been working on translation works ever since, and it's definitely sort of helped me. My craft, and my fiction, it's slowed like the art of writing fiction down for me.
Mm.
So when you write fiction, you have to, or when you translate, you have to make decisions. You have to decide, um, how you're going to, just sort of transfer this scene into this scene, and you have to think about what words you're going to, you have to make choices about what words you might keep, what words you might sort of get rid of. So there are definitely some like, I just find when I translate, I almost sort of find myself in a classroom by myself, and thinking about things that fiction writers think about when they're writing, but it feels a lot more slowed down. Like I actually see um, what I've read, in sort of craft books, or what some of my professors used to say. I see it a lot more clearly, and but I think translation has always been a tool for writers to um, be productive at sort of composing literature. Um, going back, I think, I don't know, maybe thousands of years, or hundreds of years. I think it's been an invaluable art form for, I think, especially in poetry, for writers, and it has been for me and with my fiction, to sort of slow things down and to kind of see what I'm doing in fiction, because it's right there already for me, and it's my job to obviously make it read in English the same way it read in the original language, or try to preserve that as much as possible. But yeah, it's just slowed things down for me and helped me see um, the process of writing a lot more clearly.
Mm, it just sounds like it's like translation as master class, right?
It is. It's a solo master class. It really is.
um, so, but like you say, I mean, you are sort of referring to the fact that before translators, I mean, writers translated. I mean, that we have some of the writers who are sort of in the public intellectuals, public writers who do translate and make a show of it. But I feel like it's something, in previous generations, there were many more writers who translated. And so I think one of the questions that I've asked myself, I've wondered, is how do we get more writers to translate?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think I'm going to maybe go a step back. I, I obviously have a foreign language in my arsenal, so it goes without
Well,
saying.
it wasn't foreign to you, right?
It was no, no, it wasn't foreign to me, but I do have another language aside from English in my arsenal, and that helps, But you don't have to be fluent. You have to be fluent in English, obviously, if you're translating into. You have to be fluent in the language that you're translating in. But having PhD programs, a lot of PhD programs require their students, especially in the social sciences, to be or to enter programs with a foreign language. They're expected. I don't think you can get your PhD without having, I think, achieved a certain level in a specific language. So um, I that might be, I don't know if that's asking for too much, but that's definitely something um, you need to have, that I think, in your arsenal. And I think expecting writers to, to, I think, hold on to whatever bit of a foreign language that they have and trust that the fact that they're fluent in English is ultimately what's going to help them translate whatever it is that they're working on. But yeah, I mean,
Do
I
you
don't know
think that
how to.
people are? Do you think people are like they see it as a barrier? Do you think people are like not afraid, but they're do they think they consider it and reject it, or do you think that they don't even consider it?
I mean, I think there's definitely probably an assumption that you have to be, you have to be fluent. It has to be, it has to be like your mother tongue or something,
Mm.
that foreign language. But it doesn't have to be. Just in my case, it is, but it doesn't have to be. You just you need to be able to obviously just read in that language. But if you can write in English, then um, that's that's a start. That's what you really need to start. So I don't know if the MFA programs want to do that, but it would definitely be,
Hint, hint.
you know, it's a place to start.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a place to start.
Well, I mean, speaking of your MFA program, which I know that you studied with someone who is a very well regarded, very well known translator. So is that where you sort of got the first idea to say, maybe I should do this? Or did you grow up like seeing people translate or, thinking about like it as a possibility or?
I don't think I grew up reading a lot of works in translation. I think I remember,
Mhm.
um, but I didn't necessarily, translators don't get the shine on the covers. I think the authors do. So I don't remember any, growing up, I don't remember seeing translated by on the front covers of books that I was reading in school or on, at home. So um, yeah, I think that's, what was your question again? I feel like I think I lost your question.
Well, I mean, the question is like, did you see, like, did you know about translation as a
Uh,
possibility, or was it, that you studied with, that you worked with John Keane in your MFA program, and he's the one who sort of, did he push you in that direction, or did you take inspiration from him?
yeah, I mean, I've been, I discovered, this is back in 2011. I was in Cameroon teaching at a high school. And one day I was walking out of the school and onto the street, out of the courtyard onto the street. And there was always a man there who sold school supplies, including used books. And I'd never thought twice to stop by his stand because I didn't need school supplies. And I don't think I'd ever noticed books. But one day I
Uh-huh.
decided to stop by his stand under his umbrella because it was hot. And he had this first edition book by Francis Bébé on his table. And
First edition.
I recognized the name because my parents are from Cameroon. I grew up in, a Cameroonian high school household in the US. And so I remember his music, growing up. I didn't listen to too much of it. I don't think my parents listened to much of it, but the name was familiar, but I had no idea he was a writer. I knew he was a really well-known musician, but I had no idea he wrote. Um, and so I decided to buy the book because I was curious, and it was a really short book. It was a novella. It's about 55 pages. So I bought the book and I went home that night and I read it, um, and I think overnight. I just I was it was the first book in it was the first book in that I'd ever read by a Cameroonian writer in French. And I grew up going to a bilingual school, and so I read in French, but I think the only Francophone authors I'd read were, I think, the sort of classical Mariam Abba, and I think the other one was probably um, Kamara Lai, I think was the other one. I think that was it, and and I'd never read, I don't think at that point I'd read a book by a Cameroon author in any language, including English. So that was there on the table for me.
Yeah.
The fact that that never happened. And so I purchased the book, I went home, I read it, and I was not only in love with, I was in love with the moment, not the book itself, but the feeling of having accomplished,
Mhm.
it was an accomplishment, and my first reaction was, this needs to be a play. Um,
Mm.
the way that this book is structured, Three Little Shoeshiners, it's in 5 parts. It has this very Baroquean aesthetic. It has a lot of the forms of a Baroquean play, which is not surprising given that Francis Bebe grew up, went to school in Cameroon, and I'm pretty sure he read Molière when he was a kid. So yeah, that was my initial reaction, was this needs to be a play. I was in love with this book, and it didn't hit me, I think, until later. I come also from, I'm an educator. I was an educator before I transitioned into writing, and I worked in New York City public schools, but I also worked with programs in New York City that attracted a significant population of Francophone sub-Saharan students, many of them first or second generation immigrants. And I also taught obviously in Cameroon, and I had experience in teaching other places in Haiti as well. Um, and these students are obviously represented in the New York City school system. And I'd been thinking for a long time about whether or not these students have access to books in translation where they may not see themselves, but they might see their parents, um, where they would see something very familiar. There'd obviously be something foreign. I think most good books have something to teach us or show us, or we learn from things that are foreign, but where they might feel represented and see something that was familiar. So in reading Bibi, I found a lot of things that were familiar to me. Um, just the way people spoke, habits and mannerisms. And I thought about translation when I said to myself, I wanted students that I'd worked with in the past to, have access to these books, so that's where I think translation, and then it just sort of hit me like, wait a second, I think I've read translations before, but I just didn't know that, the word translation doesn't get thrown around a lot, you hear authored or written by, but the word translated by or doesn't get thrown a lot, so that's how I came to translation. And so I sort of put aside my hopes, which are still there, of turning this into a play, but I thought, this is a really short book, it's doable, I think the skills to do this, let me give it a shot. And so it wasn't it wasn't for, I think, a couple more, no, actually maybe about a handful more years, maybe 5 more years, that um, I had a lot of free time. My family and I were living in Michigan, and I started taking writing classes out there, and but I also just started spending a lot of time translating, and I started translating this book while we were there. And I was fortunate enough to, one of my wife's advisors in Michigan was happened to know Francis Bebe's daughter. And
Mm.
at this point, I already knew sort of a lot about rights and whatnot, because I'd researched it. And the book had never been translated. I'd started translating before I even knew that, just because it was, I was just committed to, this thing that obviously, without realizing that I needed, rights in order to make this happen. But once I knew that, I emailed the publishers, and, one thing led to it, one conversation led to the next. And I just was introduced to his daughter and learned that the family owned the rights. And, this had never been translated, but a lot of his earlier works had been translated. I think he's had 3 books that have been translated in, I think, 3 or 4 languages. Yeah, and so that's how I came to, to translation. Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing story, and I mean, unwittingly, you just led perfectly into you answered my next question for you already, because I wanted for us to talk a bit about like how to choose your first project. And I don't think that all of us everyone will be able to have such a serendipitous and such an intensely personal experience as you did, although I hope I hope people do. But I think, I mean, it's really it's amazing to hear. So yeah, that's interesting. So I guess well so I want to, I mean, I'm looking at the time because these are supposed to go an hour, and we were saying that we're going to open up the conversation to everyone who's here in the room. I just want to repeat not the instructions, but the format. We are inviting you to turn your camera on if you like. And if you're comfortable speaking on screen, raise your hand by clicking either at the bottom of the participants list or using the reactions button. And you'll be invited to unmute your microphone and ask a question, whatever your question is. Or if you prefer, you can send Alex, and he's listed as Cedilla in the participants list. You can send it to him privately and he can ask your question. I mean, I think Thierry and I could keep talking if we don't have any questions yet. But I mean, I have a follow-up question for you. Would you advise aspiring translators to do it the same way you did if they're trying to break into translation, or would you give someone different advice?
I mean, there was definitely, I think I said this already, but I was, I think you have to, I think I fell in love with the book and the thought of a project around the book. So there was definitely, because it is a labor of love, I think. But definitely there is also like a greater sort of sense of purpose. But yeah, I think I would, yeah, I don't know if I have, any sort of advice that I could, but I think the main advice is, once you find something that, before you start translating, just to, yeah, make sure that the rights, for the book, I was lucky that this book was a really short book. It's only about 55 pages, but if you're tackling a much larger project, I would say start small. Start off with a story, a short story, a poem. Poetry's fun in translation. Translating poetry is fun. But yeah, start off with something that's really short. But first find out if the rights are available. And there are many ways, I think, of doing that. Mostly, I think, searched Google, then looked up through the Library of Congress, and I think I even went to some, because sometimes books will come up in searches as, with like translated titles, and so it suggests that it's been translated, but it's just someone talking about the book in English, and sort of translating the book in their writing. But yeah, just make sure that the rights are available before you translate. Yeah. Especially if it's a longer work. But yeah, start small. That's my main advice. Yeah.
That sounds good. So I think we have some questions. Alex, are these questions for you to ask, or do people want to ask themselves? It's not clear to me.
Well, somebody just raised their hand, but we have, before that, 3 questions come in through the chat to me, and it looks like a few more coming in. So the first question that came in the chat was advice for a college student interested in improving and in gaining more experience with translation. And then
well, I think we kind of just,
okay.
well, let's just take them, like, if that's okay. I mean, I think that's what Thierry was just saying, start small, as he said, which is great, good advice. If you're hoping to publish, to clear the rights, not clear the rights, make sure that the rights are available, that someone else isn't already working on it, doesn't already have. Somebody muted me. If you're just starting, I would also say, just do it. If you want to try your hand at it and see what it feels like, just start doing something to sort of get a sense of like what the whole exercise, what this whole practice is about. So,
I mean, I would also add, I think, just see if there may be professors who translate. If you have the opportunity to do an independent study and said professor, is willing to take on your translation project in an independent study, that's something also to explore. In my MFA program, we didn't have, there was no translation component, but that's how I got to work with John Kane. Is I did an independent study, and we worked together on my translation. So yeah, see if there are professors, people who translate at your school, and hit them up, email them.
Okay, we now
Alex,
have 3 people with their hands up and 3 questions in the chat. So I guess we can alternate between them. I'm just trying to be as fair as possible here. So the first
we want to try, hopefully get to everyone.
The first person to put their little blue hand up is Daniel Hahn.
Hi.
Daniel Hahn.
Hello. Hi, Allison. Hi, Thierry. Thanks very much.
Hi.
It's really interesting to hear you talk. I wonder if you'd say something, I guess, Thierry, this is for you, in terms even of programming at the center, about using translation to teach other kinds of writing. So using translation to teach people who are another kind of writer, not in terms of what Allison was saying, trying to persuade writers to be translators, but thinking about what you were saying, Thierry, about what you learned from translation, about that slowing down. It seems to me that that would be such a useful discipline for a lot of people who are trying to become better writers, quite apart from whether they want to become translators themselves. I wonder what you think about the possibilities in that.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion, Daniel. No, I think it's a great idea. As I was talking, something made me think about that. I think I was thinking about, I think there are people, you can also translate English. I think you can take a work in English and translate it into English, and so I think in that vein, I think what you just said is definitely a possibility. And I think definitely something that we will explore. It's a lot of fun, I think to, not just to translate, but to sort of see, like I said before, writing sort of slowed down and sort of starting from scratch, just sort of doing a sort of rough translation and then just sort of, like editing, removing things and seeing how you sort of build the story from, this rock that you've sort of chiseled down to, a work of English that's as close to the original one, the other language. So no, that's a great idea, Daniel. Thanks for sharing that. That definitely, you've given me some ideas. So thank you.
Okay, going back to the chat questions, I'm going to throw 2 questions at you, Thierry. I also chatted them to you. One is, you mentioned that being fluent in English is essential to translate. Do you think there's a big difference between translating from your mother language to English and the other way around? Is it harder to grow in your career if you translate from your first language into English? Do native speakers of English have an advantage when translating to English? And the second question, do you translate for meaning or for style and rhythm? It's hard to do both, isn't it?
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I chatted them to you too, if you want to refer.
I'm looking at them right now in my chat. Thank you, Alex. Well, I think first I'll say, I mean, English and French were both my mother tongues. So I was born here, but so French and English were well, at least English with my siblings and French with my parents and at school. But I don't translate from from English into French. But is there a big difference between translating from? I've never tried translating from another language. So I don't know if I can. I don't know if I could answer. I've only ever translated from French into English. So yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm sorry to the person who asked that question. Is it harder to grow in your career if you translate from your first language into English? I mean, my career, I think, in translation is only getting started. So yeah, I don't know if it's. Allison, do you have an answer for this question? Do you know if it's harder to grow?
Yeah,
Want me to repeat the
can you just
question for you?
repeat is it harder to grow in your career?
Is it harder to grow in your career if you translate from your first language into English? Native speakers of English
I'm
have
not
an advantage
sure
when
that I understand that entirely. I mean, there's a lot of really, really, I find really fascinating conversations happening about that within the translation world right now. Talking about, I mean, I was the co-organizer and co-host of Translating the Future which took place over several months last year, and we had a little mini series in there called Motherless Tongues. Multiple I can't even remember what the subtitle was now, but we had, I think a total of 9 really amazing translators talking about, what is this, they're deconstructing the idea of what your mother tongue is. And I don't think that there are any hard and fast rules. I think, I think the system is not necessarily set up for it, but I think that system is being broken down right now. And I think that people are exploding those notions, and I think they should, because I don't think, what is a mother tongue? What is a native tongue? I think, if we're talking about heritage speakers, I think we really need to encourage and enable more people to try translating into and out of many languages. Because that's what we need. In the United States, and I think in the UK, literary translation has historically been extremely white, mostly male, extremely white, and very academic. And I think we really need more people doing it to make it more interesting.
And I'll try to answer the last question. Do you translate for meaning or for style, rhythm? Is it hard? It's hard to do both, isn't it? I translate definitely for style and rhythm. As a musician, what I found really interesting about Bibi's work is it's very rhythmic. You just it's apparent. And so I really want to preserve that in my translation. And so I definitely translate for rhythm and style too. He's got a very unique style. And so, yeah, I definitely want to preserve his poetic language and these bursts of long expositions and yeah, definitely for style and rhythm and meaning as well. But I find that easier, I think, maybe than style and rhythm. So I have a lot of fun with style and rhythm.
Next, we could go to Gabriella, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for this conversation. This is a sort of tactical question, but I was curious about the Bridge Book Award that you mentioned. I'm a translator from the Italian, and I wanted to know if you know how the translator for the American book that's given the award to be translated into Italian is chosen, if that's done by one of the sponsors or if there's a publishing deal attached to that. Just curious.
Yeah, good question. There is, we're actually having a meeting about that next week. There is a publishing deal attached to it. I would say this, if you don't mind emailing me, and we can definitely talk
Sure.
offline. I think we do reach out to translators that we know, but we're always looking for translators. So yeah, definitely reach out, and we can talk some more.
Cool. And your email is on the website somewhere?
It's, yeah, my first name at centerforfiction.org if you can't find it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thomas, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. I have thanks again for hosting this and for sharing your insights, Thierry. I had two questions really quick. First, if anyone has any experience and advice on working on a translation project as the translator or as the writer, where the writer doesn't speak the language into which it's being translated. I'm just kind of curious on that. And then second, kind of building on that question about translating for style and meaning, what strategies have you found really effective, when you encounter a situation where something can't be translated 100%? I mean, all my background is academic and translating my own work, but I'm curious how you've approached that in fiction, because you can't always just put footnotes like you can in other styles of writing.
So I don't think I can answer your first question because I don't have the author I'm translating from is no longer. But to answer your second question, I don't really have a strategy besides writing and rewriting and putting things down. And I find that when I put things down for, especially the most difficult parts, I don't, in the beginning, I would definitely sort of obsess over it, but I find it a lot easier to come back to something I've put down for about a week or two, and it won't necessarily come automatic, but it's still, I think it's still judging in my head, once I've let go of it. And when I come back to it, I just feel freer. I think at the end, you just sort of have to allow yourself some freedom to, because it is your work, it belongs to you. It's part of you, so letting it go and then coming back to it and trusting that whatever it is that you put out there is, after multiple attempts, is the best translation. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, it does.
I think that's my approach. Yeah, sure.
Okay, we have a couple questions that came in about translating style, I guess is the way I would summarize them. One which is, Thierry, what's your approach to non-standard dialogue or dialects capturing voice and phrasing in English? And also, sorry, when you're translating poetry, do you translate for meaning or for style and rhythm? Or both? Or did you already answer that?
Well, I'll answer the second question. I haven't spoken about poetry, and I'm happy to answer the second question. The first question, I haven't really encountered a lot of dialect. There are definitely some phrases or expressions that have been the novella that I've been working on. The main characters are young people; they're teenagers. And so, yeah, they talk like teenagers. And I've been lucky enough to have worked with a lot of teenagers. And so I think a lot about the way teenagers talk in English. And it takes place also in a city. So I think I sometimes also try to urbanize, I think, the dialect. And this has happened, I think, over time. That definitely was not, it wasn't even the fifth translation. It's there now, the seventh or eighth time around, but partly because I just was not comfortable doing that, but realizing as I was rereading that I'm dealing with these characters are young and they live in the city and they talk differently than the adults do in this work that I'm translating. So trying to differentiate the way that young people talk. And so yeah, just thinking a lot about the way young people talk in English has helped. I don't know if that answers your question, Julie. I think, Julie, that was your question. But and to answer the second question, yeah, there is one poem I've been struggling with a lot. And I haven't gone back to it in quite a few months, but I'm prepared to rewrite the poem, and I think the meaning that that Francis intended to not be there. You know, I think with poetry sometimes I think you have the freedom to start from scratch. And maybe I'll just share this. There's a line in the poem Nuit Blanche, which is in French, it's kind of to spend a nuit blanche is basically to not sleep. And the character in this poem has had a nuit blanche. And so the word white, it's a poem that deals with race. And the word white is very significant, but in English, the translation of sort of not, what do you, well, I don't even know what you call it in English. What do you call it in English? I don't know, staying up, I don't know if there's a translation in English that actually has the word white. So I've had to think about what exists in English that has the word white that would still allow me to keep the meaning and the essence of this poem. But that wasn't there in the beginning. I was like, screw this, I'm not doing poetry. But in sort of reading more about, how translators translate poetry, I've, given myself the freedom to go back and I think I have an idea of how I'm going to do it. But that's one example. I'm not going, there's, Nuit Blanche is not going to be in there in English, but, it'll be something else that's white.
Let's go to Jay now. Jay, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Hi there. I had a question about, I guess, the process of initiating a project. If you've already determined that no one else is working on a project and that the rights in English are likely available, the next step to approach the copyright holder or a potential publisher, and when you do so, you bring a sample of your translation or a full manuscript in rough form, or a fully polished complete manuscript.
I haven't submitted samples. I have submitted samples once, but yeah, I think submitting a sample would be the next step. But another thing I think which, at least for me, has been really helpful. There's a nonprofit called ALTA, the American Language Translators Association, and becoming, when you're a member of ALTA, there are a lot of resources, and their newsletter has a lot of good practical information about prizes and contests. So I think getting your work out there in that way is also really helpful, because you have editors and translators judging these things, and so that's also really helpful, I think, is to to submit for contests and prizes, and yeah, and maybe Allison, I don't know, you have more experience in translation than I do, but
well, I mean, I think that's great advice. ALTA is a tremendous resource in the United States. There's the Society of Authors and Translators Association, although I think most of their services are available to members. But there are a lot of resources available online. And like you said, submitting to journals and magazines, perhaps first, entering competitions. And there happen to be, especially in this present moment, there are a lot of workshops going on that you have access to in a way that you didn't before. I think actually, I thought it was, I don't know if it was Danny who was speaking earlier, who there are workshops that are happening at the BC, the British Center for Literary Translation. They are running workshops. Is it City University? I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the program, but I know there's another workshop series that's happening in the UK. And that would be a great way to get some feedback. I see there's definitely a slant to a lot of these questions. So I think we're definitely going to have to make this the focus of one of the upcoming clinics. But I see where we only have a couple of minutes left, and we have this one question that we are hoping to ask all of our participants, all of our co-hosts, I mean, for the series itself. And so this question is to you, Thierry. What would an ideal future of literary translation look like to you?
Well, translation belongs, I think thinking about translation as belonging to an ecosystem, where, I think there are a lot of sort of actors involved and a lot of systems involved. But I think ultimately for me, I would like, quite simply at the end of the day, when you recommend a work in translation to someone that people will start saying, have you read such and such's translation of such and such's book? I think once we, and that's a very bold, it's very bold, but we have to be bold. And yeah, I think once we've reached that point where we are saying it that way, translation will have arrived, I think, at a place where it deserves. Translation is very deserving. So, have you read such and such's translation of such and such's book? That's how I'll answer that question.
Have you read Kehou's translation of Francis Bébé? Exactly. I think that's a great note to end on. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But thank you all so much for joining us for this first event in our translation clinics with the Center for Fiction and Cedilla and Company. And thank you again to the Center for Fiction for hosting these clinics. Thank you to Thierry for being our first guest. These clinics will take place on the third Thursday of every month. Please sign up to be notified of upcoming events. Next month in February, we'll hear from Aaron Robertson and Sean Gasper-Bai discussing existing and potential models of literary translation collectives. The registration link, I believe, has been posted in the chat and is on the Center for Fiction's website. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.